Good morning. Thank you, guys. I'm going to attempt to talk about humility, so forgive me if I have a microphone, a clicker, my cards, and my coffee, of which I will hopefully sip on. First, I guess I want to thank Paul and Kate for inviting me today, and certainly want to thank John and Mark. This theater is just amazing. I was blown away. In fact, the seats, they look so comfortable. I'm a little worried you could fall asleep, but hopefully that won't happen. And then, of course, I want to thank my staff for brewing coffee this morning. So 4 or 5 weeks ago, I got an email from Paul, and in the email, he explained Creative Mornings, and I had heard of it, and he asked me, would you like to give a talk on humility, and that the topic for the month, the global topic was humility, and of course my answer was no. How do you give a speech on humility, right? I mean, it's almost like counterintuitive. So I'm actually not going to give a speech on humility. I'm actually going to tell you the story of Stone Creek Coffee in the next 15 minutes or so. Really, the first 18 years of Stone Creek Coffee. We've been around for 20 years now, or 22 years. And I'm going to tell you the story of Stone Creek, and in that story, I'm going to weave ideas about humility. I'm going to talk about humility, but I'm going to put it in this other context. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about Stone Creek in terms of where we're headed, where the next 20 years will take the company. And then lastly, we'll have some time for questions, which seems maybe more appropriate for a discussion of humility. So we'll have some time to talk at the end. So as I was reflecting on what is humility, it's not really an emotion, right? I mean, it's not like joy or sadness, and it actually, from my perspective, it's actually a way. It's sort of a way of being, and yet it's not just a way of being unto yourself, because in order for you to be humble or not be humble, you need to have someone else or something to relate to. So it's in relation to the other, right? I mean, it kind of, whatever the other is, whether it's a person or nature or whatever. So this is what I kind of think about as humility. And so let me talk about my journey, the last 22 years of building this company. From being a 24-year-old kid, I went to college. Am I talking really fast? Okay. So I had a lot of coffee, and right. But I went to college in Madison. I graduated like we all do. What do you do with your life? I had long hair. I wore a beret. I smoked hand-rolled cigarettes. And I needed to figure out what to do with my life, right? Like we all do. And I decided I had two choices. I had applied to the Peace Corps. I was going to go to Honduras and do small business consulting. Or alternatively, I thought, well, okay, I want to change the world. I mean, I had this idea that I wanted to make a difference in the world. I was a sociology major and also a business major. And I knew that the world was driven in many ways by money. And that sounds a little crass, but I kind of decided, hey, I'm going to start a company. I'm going to grow it really big. I'm going to sell it for lots of money, and then I'm going to change the world. And right, so this was my plan as a 23-year-old kid. And I started down that path. And I started the company. I didn't go to Honduras to do the Peace Corps. I said, let me get started on this journey of building a company. And I named my company Giri Corporation, so G-I-R-I. It's obviously a giant word behind me. And the word means social obligation. So it comes from a samurai code of honor called Bushido. And the word means social obligation, as I said, or to live with a sense of the other. And I had this concept in my head before I roasted my first pound of coffee, before I even had the name Stone Creek Coffee. So we are a DBA company, meaning Stone Creek Coffee is our doing business as, but this is our corporate name. This is the founding value upon which we have built our company. And that's kind of cool. It's just that this journey from day one, from roasting that first pound of coffee until about 4 years ago, it was a fun business to build. We built our roaster, we built cafes, we eventually started a wholesale business, and we added people, and we added trucks, and the business grew, and it was reasonably successful. And I guess I was proud of it, but there was a problem. And coming into our 18th year or so, we had accumulated a lot, kind of like a closet, just sort of slowly filling up. And we had lost kind of the soul of the company. We had lost clarity on our purpose. And you can see all these different words. We had our values and our brew steps, and we were trying to be a lot of different things. And the reason there was so much going on is back to this idea of Giri. I was very open to other people contributing, participating, giving their opinion, telling me how to maybe do things. And I'll give you a couple examples. So if we were building a cafe and an electrician was up on a ladder hanging a light, the electrician would say to me, Eric, how do you want this light? Where should it go? And I'd say, well, how does it look from your perspective? Do you think it looks good? And I was very cognizant of the other. Obviously, that's what I started the company on. So this kind of driving value influenced my management style. It influenced the culture very much at Stone Creek. I'll give you maybe a couple other examples. So we buy coffee directly from coffee farms around the world. And at one point, someone came to me and said, Eric, the coffee farmers in Brazil, they would like an extra $5,000 for their coffee this year. I know we have a fixed price, we had a contract, but the Brazilian real is sort of upside down against the dollar, and they just need more money. Okay, Giri, social obligation, be cognizant of the other, no problem. Send them a check for $5,000. What goes around comes around. These were the values that I was building the company. It's just that they actually sent us crappy coffee and never paid us back. So there were a number of examples where I was trying to act consistent with my values and this idea of the other, and yet it didn't work so well. I'll give you maybe one or two more examples. So at one point, a couple employees came to me and said, hey, can we talk to you, Eric? And I said, yeah, of course. They said, we're a little uncomfortable when you swear. Shit, right? So rather than me saying, well, I understand that and I respect it, it's just that it's my company and this is kind of who I am. But rather I said, well, okay, I hear you, right? Live with a sense of the other, and I will do my best to reduce my swearing. Okay, so you can see that and again, these are just a couple small examples, but for many years I lived in this sort of, I guess I would think about it as more of a paternal kind of environment where I was giving and giving and caring and caring and caring, and ultimately that was fine, the business did okay, but I was working really hard, 60, 70 hours a week. I was carrying the financial and operational burden of the company on my shoulders, and ultimately it got to kind of be a drag, and I was coming up on our 20th anniversary of Stone Creek, and my wife Melissa is here, who owns the company with me now, and we were talking about the future, and I was concerned. I was concerned for a couple things. One, the competitive landscape of the specialty coffee market was changing, and it was changing dramatically, right? Everybody knows that 15 years ago there were no Starbucks in Milwaukee, and now there's 40. There's American runs on Dunkin', and there's McCafe, and this whole segment of specialty coffee was changing. It was becoming more and more and more competitive, and so I had a bit of a problem. In my management style and the way I was working, the company was not positioned to compete for the next 20 years, right? I gave you a lot of examples where I was carrying a large burden for the company. We had not changed actively. We were sort of confused about what the core principles of the business were. And you throw on top of that changing market conditions, and you put in there my sort of DNA, and we had a real problem. So I'm just going to give you a quick peek at this is where we ended up, and I'm going to talk about the future in a minute, about this idea of farm to cup, reinventing Brew City, and Coffee Geek. But we were coming into this moment with a lot of chaos. The business was it was still profitable, but if I squinted my eyes, I could see far enough into the future to know that maybe it wasn't sustainable. It's terrifying, right? Terrifying. So let me take a little sidebar and tell you why I think I was built that way. Why for 18 years I designed a company that was built around this idea of Giri, or social obligation, with way too much humility is my argument. And ultimately what I'll conclude at the end is that your humility must be in balance, and that ultimately mine was not at that moment. So let me take a little sidebar and tell you about my something that happened to me as a teenager that I think influenced who I was then and who I am today. So when I was 14, I think I just need a little coffee. When I was 14, I grew up in Green Bay. I have 3 sisters. And when I was 14, my dad asked us all to come into the living room. We sat down on the couch, and my dad had a couple things to say to the family. And the first thing he said is, "I love you very much." The second thing he said to us is, "I'm leaving the family." The third thing he said is, "I'm moving to the cottage." And the fourth thing he said is, "You're welcome to come visit anytime." Wow. Okay. So you're 14. Hopefully you were all 14. You were all 14 at some point, right? And you know what that's like, right? 14 is when you have your first boyfriend, your first girlfriend. You're learning to be your own person. It's a very unique time for your emotional development and who you're going to be as a person. And at 14, my family was torn apart, on my dad's choice, which is, I guess, sort of fine. But ultimately, I had to come through that, and it actually, I think subconsciously made me very sensitive to the feelings of others. And that in a way, I kind of vowed, I'm not going to ever hurt someone the way I was hurt, or the way I saw my mother hurt, or my sisters. And I think that influenced, I named it Giri Corporation, right? I mean, it actually laid down, in a way, my emotional and sort of my relationship DNA, and that's how I built this company. And yet, running a company, changing a company, I will argue, pretty difficult if that's your DNA. Okay, so that gives you a little background. At least it's one of the ways that I think I was influenced in terms of how I built the company. So, okay, we come up to year 18. The business is doing okay, not stellar. I am built from this DNA of giving to the other. I'm exhausted. I actually got married in this time frame. I had a little son at home. We were going to have another son. And, geez, I was kind of in a really difficult spot. I had a pretty decent-sized company. I had a lot of people who depended on our work. And I wanted to succeed, but I didn't know how. Right? I was stuck. So what do you do when you have a complicated problem? Well, first you panic, right? You just freak out. So you have a few months of, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? And then you start to talk to other people, maybe people who are friends or mentors, and you begin to work through what's going on and how you might possibly get out of this sticky situation that I was in. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I did that, or am in the process of doing that. So I would argue that every one of us operates almost exclusively on our habits, right? You get up in the morning, you walk to the bathroom, you put your clothes on, you drive to Stone Creek Coffee, you open your desk, you turn on your computer, and sincerely, like, I want you to think about this. You operate every day based on your habits and heuristics because your brain doesn't have enough power and capacity to be always thinking, okay? So if you operate on habits, how was I, and this was one assumption that I learned through talking to my mentors. Okay, these are habits, so the first thing I needed to do was change my habits. And ultimately, if I was going to change the company and position it for the next 20 years, then I had to learn to change. It was about me. It was not about the other. This was going to become a very selfish and very centric journey for the next few years of me figuring out who I was and what I wanted to be when I grew up and what kind of company we wanted. And so to do that, I began just doing things that would force habit change. I would write in my book, here's what I'm going to stop doing. And I still do it every day. No, do not talk so much. Ask questions. Like I literally write down every day the habits that I'm trying to break and the ones I'm trying to create. So that's one small thing I did. Another thing I did is when I woke up in the morning, I didn't just jump out of bed and sort of live that inertia lifestyle that I mentioned, what I did is I sat on the edge of my bed, and I still do this some days. I did it this morning coming to talk to you, as I just reflected on what is it that I'm trying to do today? Like intentionality, right? Be thoughtful about what you're trying to do, because your habits, I guarantee you, your habits will win. They will always win. They're habits. And then a couple things I did in the context of Stone Creek, and again, there were many tools, and this is a messy, messy process, as you can see. A couple things that I did is, instead of caring for the other sort of like paternally, I started caring and tried to care for the other in this kind of way. I care for you so much, I won't let you fail. Right? I care for you so much, I won't let you fail. So I didn't have to change who I was, right? Because that was the trick. Because you don't wake up one day and say, today I'm different. Yesterday I was that. Today I am this. You actually, it takes time, it takes hard work. And so I didn't want to change being a caring person or this kind of person I thought I was, but I had to change how I went about it. And so I care for you so much I won't let you fail. And how that worked kind of in practice was I would talk to people about, more honestly, I would talk to them about their path, about their work, and it just drove more honesty around the conversations I was having, because I wasn't going to accept somebody failing themselves, failing me, failing their commitments, and we would have more and more and deeper conversations about their work and their time at Stone Creek. So one other little thing that I did, and I still do this with the teams at Stone Creek now, is I have this saying, it's better to be clear than right. Okay? That's a really neat one. I'm not sure what you're going to remember from this talk today, but that'd be a cool one for you to take with you. And what that did is, instead of me having to be right, all I had to be was clear, right? So today we're going to do 1, 2, 3, but then overnight I learned something new, and then tomorrow, actually, I'm going to change. Today we're going to do X, Y, Z, and then a week from now we learn something new, and I say, well, you know, I said that last week, but today, just let me be clear, we're going to do 5, 6, 7. And in the past, people would, if I changed something, they'd be like, well, why are you changing? And we just did it, and we got to redo it, and oh, woe is me. And now I just said, no, I'm changing, and now am I clear what we're going to do? Okay, cool. So that really helped me facilitate change and have the freedom to do it. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit, again, about this humility in balance. And ultimately, not only did I have to change myself, but it wasn't just about me, right? I couldn't just walk in and be a different person, because the company was still a little bit at risk in terms of its positioning in the marketplace. We had increased competition from local roasters and Dunkin', as I mentioned, and others, and it was time for a change. And so over this same last 3 or 4 years, we also worked on a new vision for Stone Creek. So who do we want to be? Where are we going? What is the next 20 years going to look like? And that, I can tell you, is not a humble process. It is a very, very hard, very inward-looking process, because ultimately people were looking for me and say, well, what kind of company do you want, and who are you? And it wasn't humble. I didn't bring a committee together to do that work. Ultimately, I tried to put some stakes in the ground and say, this is who I think we should become. And then ultimately, I could invite others to join me in this process of aligning to the vision. And ultimately, as we were coming through this process, there were a number of people who maybe didn't want to go on that journey, right? They had come through that other culture. They had lived at Stone Creek for maybe many years, and I had to sit down with a lot of people and say, listen, this is where we're going now. Are you interested? And some people said, by all means, I'm in. Let's roll. Let's do it. And other people said, well, you know, I kind of liked the past, and whether they said it overtly or just through their actions, ultimately I had to sit a number of people down and say, you know, I like you, and we've had a good 10 years together, and you can come to the holiday party. It's just that you can't work here anymore, right? Because the success of the company depended on this kind of alignment, that everybody who was there said, I'm here because I believe in where we're headed, farm to cup, Coffee Geek, and reinventing Brew City. And that's ultimately what we did. There were a number of people who left the company either by choice or I had to have a hand in it. But that was a difficult time for me, because in essence I was doing what my dad had done, right? And again, we're not going to have a long session of therapy, but ultimately I was having to kind of, what I felt was hurt, but ultimately I knew the business depended on having those very difficult conversations, and of course I always tried to handle them with as much care and respect as I could. So ultimately, you can see this journey for me from the day I started the company until 18 or 19 years ago. It was about Giri, it was about living with a sense of other. It's just that it wasn't in balance. And it took a lot of pressure. It took my new wife, it took a little son at home to realize that I was out of balance in terms of how I ran the company. And ultimately, we had to change the company, secondly, because of the market conditions and prepare it for the next 20 years. So that's what we did, and I think the company is prepared for the future. So that's sort of the end of my part one, and I want to show you a few things about the future, where we're headed as a company. These are some slides coming up of some of the new design work, and I know it's Creative Mornings, it's not Engineering Morning. So I want to show you some of the work that we do with we hired a new design firm at the time, a very small firm here in Milwaukee called LPW. Libby's here somewhere, and Patrick, who works with us. And what they did for us is they gave voice to our intention, to our passion, to what we loved about coffee. And you can see Never Stop Learning, Go to the Light, these iconic Milwaukee posters. These are an early set of posters on growing and roasting and brewing and sipping. We just never had a voice to share our passion. And with this new clarity around these anchors that we were going to build the future around, we began to build graphical treatments and other things to help tell this story. One of the values we built the company on is being a coffee geek. And what we mean by coffee geek is that you are super passionate and you want to teach other people. And these are a couple posters. The one on the right about global coffee production. The one on the left is about a honey process, a type of processing coffee. And a couple more I'll show you. This is just a cool one. These are just iconic Milwaukee images. We're a Milwaukee company. It's one of the values of the future. It's what we're building the company on. You can see American movie, and my favorite is the Milverine there with no arms. And then the last value is a pillar that we're building the future on is this idea of farm to cup. And let me just briefly tell you about what farm to cup means. So in the coffee world, coffee is a fruit. If you didn't know that, it's a fruit. It grows on a small-ish tree. And coffee ripens. The cherry is actually green, and then it turns red. And then it turns a very deep burgundy, or kind of what we call a bull's blood red when it's ready to be harvested. And it's in that very moment, coffee is perfect. Like that cherry and the coffee inside it is perfect. And then we do nothing but screw it up from there. So what we do is we don't sort the coffees right at origin at the farm. We don't process them correctly. We leave the coffee at port in Mombasa for 3 months in 90-degree heat. We ship it here. We roast it incorrectly. We brew it incorrectly with the grind type. We have the wrong water and the total dissolved solids and hardness in the water. We put it in the wrong vessel. It's not the right temperature, and you get it, and we screwed it up. What the farm to cup value says is that we have to work from farm to cup. We have to be engaged in every one of those steps if we have any hope of taking that perfect red cherry and delivering it to your morning cup so that it's outstanding, and that is what we're building the company on going forward. So one last comment. We have one little thing we do at Stone Creek in our meetings, and I ask our teams when we're inside a meeting, working through execution or projects, that you don't use the word we. Right? You've all been in these meetings. There's 20 people, there's 8 people, and some joker in the corner says, "We have a problem." And at Stone Creek, we don't let that happen. We say, "Wait, who's we? You might have a problem. Johnny might have a problem. Susie might have a problem, but we do not have a problem. So please use I and me when you're talking on behalf of yourself." Right? It helps get to the core really quickly. And then, as we're working through these issues, I and me, ultimately it becomes our plan, and ultimately we leave the room and it becomes we. Right? And this is, to me, is, I guess, my final example of humility and balance, that you speak for yourself, you think for yourself, you build your path, but ultimately it has to dovetail with those you're working with in the company that you're trying to build. So thank you. So the question is, that it started out as this idea of Giri, and then it kind of switched to this, the sense of the other, and it switched to this very personal reflection and personal journey. And so I guess my thought is there is no other, there is no collection without the individual. So by definition, it's always about the individual, right? I mean, it's the collection, we become we just by a sense of a bunch of individuals. So yeah, I mean, I think that's obvious. Otherwise, I would be, I would be just one of many, and that was about my journey, and ultimately, it is about my journey.
What would you say is something that you can be humble enough to admit you have learned from one of your competitors?
Whoa. I can tell you a lot. So what I think about our local competitors, Collectivo and previously Altera, I think they're just brilliant executors, right? I mean, think about what they've built in this city, these beautiful spaces with just gorgeous build-outs, really decent coffee, food service, cool t-shirts, the list goes on, and so I have kind of mad respect for their ability to take an idea and just build it out and just execute, and we'll build a brewery and a bakery, and we'll just keep going, and no one's going to stop us, and that's pretty awesome. In terms of some of the others, Anodyne, I think, you know, kind of humble beginnings, those guys are just quality, smart, talented coffee people, and I try to learn from their passion around just the cup and the quality. And Starbucks, you know, it's hard, everyone wants to kind of poo-poo on Starbucks, but gosh, I mean, that's a pretty noble effort. I mean, they make a lot of difference at Origin. I mean, things that nobody knows about, we run into them in Origin countries around the world where they're making these investments, where they're paying more than they have to. I mean, it's a company that, though it's really huge, it's a company that's built on values. They have a soul, and that's pretty cool, and so I have a lot of respect for that. So those are just some.
So you said it's better to be clear than right. Tell us about a time you looked back and thought maybe it would have been better to be right.
What time do we have to leave? So, I mean, it goes up and down the spectrum. I mean, it would have been better for me to not have opened 3 or 4 locations that I ended up closing. I wish I would have been right. I mean, I was, you know, ultimately clear we're going to do this, but I was wrong. It cost a lot of money. We had to close a couple locations. I built an online business in 1999 called GoCoffee.com, and this was an aggregation of other small roasters around the country, and we were going to be the front end, and this was right 1999 boom, and boy, I was going to be part of it, and I got all these roasters on board, and it just failed miserably, and we lost like $172,000, and it was really bad, and I wish I had been right and not done that one also. So, I mean, truly the list goes on and on and on, and ultimately if you don't fail, you don't learn, right? So if you're not failing regularly, you've got a problem. Other questions?
So you were talking about with your definition of farm to cup, meaning excellent quality, but I also see a huge amount of social obligation in that, and I'd like to hear a little bit more about how you see those linked.
Right.
Because I totally see, like,
right. Well,
they're dependent on each other.
Yeah, of course. And I, you know, I had 20 minutes to like tell my life story, so I couldn't tell kind of all facets, but I can comment on that now. So we travel to Origin, of course, to bring quality through that process, as I explained it. But we travel to Origin to meet with our farmers. Right? When we go to Origin, it's not necessarily about the tree, it's about the people. It's about talking to them about the life and the farm and what they're doing, and it's about ultimately negotiating a price with them that helps them invest in their farm and build a better future for themselves. And so I very much love this industry because we're not just making a difference here in Milwaukee, and that's something that I committed to when I started this company, but we're actually making a difference in the communities around the world where we can pay more than an international company down the block can, and it is very much a relationship-driven social change program, but it's hard for me to explain that. And ultimately, you come into our shop not because we gave a little bit more money to a farmer or we made the difference in somebody's lives in Costa Rica, but rather you come in for an amazing cup of coffee. So that as I share with my team, the cup always wins. Because if the cup wins, we can do these other things. The cup has to win. So we always start with quality now, but we have all these add-ons and neat benefits that are layered behind it. And if you dig into our company or if you work at our company, you certainly learn all those things.
First of all, you said speaking on humility is counterintuitive, but I just want to remark that you seem very humble, and I think you're quite an example, and I'm so impressed.
Thank you. Thank you.
My question is, do you have any books that you've been reading or any podcasts you've been listening to so we can sort of take a little of you with us?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of them, I'll share, I guess it depends on the topic, but in terms of the change that I've been going through the last 4 years, there's one specific mentor that helped me a lot, and I can tell you this is not a mentor that I have other people who I've introduced this person to, and they don't like this person at all. And it's a gentleman by the name of Lee Thayer. He's 80-ish years old. He was a humanities professor at the University of Wisconsin for a long time, and then he moved over to the business side, and he became kind of a business coach. But he wrote a book called Thinking, Being, Doing. And I talk to Lee, not so much anymore, maybe once a quarter now, but I was talking to him regularly, and in his book, it's a very dense book, and this is where some of these concepts about habits came out, and he helped me understand how we live a certain way, and that we sort of all fight these sort of dragons, and that ultimately this is a battle with ourselves, and to change and learn, it starts within. So if you're interested in these kind of ideas, some of the things I talked about today, his book, Thinking, Being, Doing, is outstanding. And then, there are any number of other kind of business topics where there are a number of books that I love that I guess I won't go into, and certainly come talk to me after if some of those marketing, design, whatever are interesting. Okay, well, thank you all very much.
Thanks again, Eric.